Hey guys, it's Heather and Kristen, the hosts of Sinister Sweethearts podcast, and we want to take a little bit of time to tell you about our show.
We're former college sweetmates turned lifelong best friends who share a love for all things weird, creepy, and sinister.
Come along with us as we journey through the 50 states of America, exploring everything from the paranormal to conspiracy theories to true crime and everything in between.
It's a wild ride with a new state chosen every week, and you never know what you're going to get. New episodes drop every Tuesday, so come find us at sinistersweethearts.com or your favorite podcast player, and let's explore our sinister sides together.
This podcast is a proud member of the Paranormality Podcast Network.
Okay. Show me.
Sometimes that is better.
Welcome to the Prairie Land Paranormal Podcast.
Be sure you never, ever scream.
A podcast where we will explore the dark corners of our world, the weird, the creepy, and the strange.
There are no accidents, no coincidences.
I am your host, Eric Carrier.
The boogeyman is real.
And they mostly come at night.
My co-host is Jessica Carrier.
Now come out wherever you are.
Thank you for joining us for a journey into the unknown.
Be one of us.
Let's get started with today's show.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. This is the Prairie Land Paranormal Podcast, and I'm your host, Jessica Carrier. I'm here with my husband and co-host, Eric Carrier.
No. I don't like that. I'm the host, and you're the co-host. Well, Jessica, what do we have in store for our listeners today?
Today is going to be a great show. We're going to be joined by Dr. Donald Molnar. He's a paranormal investigator and a practicing internal
Is he Batman?
No, he's not. He's an internal medicine physician, and we are going to be discussing near-death experiences. We're going to be talking about deathbed visions, after-death communication, and the 12 steps of a near-death experience.
If you're a new listener and you're here for the first time, welcome. If you've been around for a while, welcome back. Jessica, how can our listeners support our podcast?
If you'd like to support our podcast, there are a few ways you can do that. First, you can hit up our tip jar and leave us a small tip. Second, you could continue to share the show. Share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with anyone really. Indie shows like ours thrive on word of mouth. Third, you can continue to vote for us on the Paranormality Podcast Network Paranormal Top 25.
We are pleased to announce that we have remained on the list for the month of April. Thank you for making that possible, and please keep voting for us each and every month at paranormalityradio.com.
The last way you can support our show is to come and hang out with us on social media. We have accounts on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, and we love to hang out and meet you guys there.
All of those accounts can be accessed through our website at www.prairielandparanormalpodcast.com. The last thing we need to tell you about is our book giveaway. Author Betsy Kulikowski, the author of the Veritas Codex series, has been gracious enough to donate 6 signed copies of her book, The Veritas Codex, to the Paranormality Podcast Network. If you're interested in receiving a free copy of her book, signed by the author, text CODEX, that's C-O-D-E-X, to 941-666-6678. Winners will be contacted after April 14th. Is there anything else, Jess?
Nope.
Okay, let's get on with today's show. We'd like to welcome Dr. Donald Molnar to our show today. Dr. Molnar, thank you for being with us.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
We're going to be talking a little bit with you today about near-death experiences. We would like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to our audience. Why don't you take a minute and tell people who you are?
Sure thing. My name's Donald Molnar. I'm a physician, originally from Ohio, born and raised in Ohio. Then I moved to Virginia in 2009. I did all my training up in Ohio, medical school, and I went to the University of Akron and Ritztown, Northeastern Ohio College University Medical School up there. started out practicing in Ohio and then decided to move to Virginia, Charlottesville, Virginia in 2009 for family reasons. And I worked at a couple of different places in Virginia and all that. So I'm an internal medicine doc. Internal medicine doc is from the age of 18 up to people pass away. So that's one of the things I talk about, why I often feel like I'm at the gateway of the afterlife, because I'm helping people comfortably pass on that have decided they'd rather just don't want to live anymore and just want to be comfortable and kind of let nature take its course. You know, from a paranormal perspective, the reason why I'm so open-minded to all this and really interests me is I've kind of had things happen to me all my life from the time I was a kid until now. When I was a kid, I would see things, hear things. My parents were real open about it. My mom and dad were both real open to the paranormal. We'd often have family discussions, and sometimes we'd even have mini seances trying to contact what we thought was my grandfather, my dad's dad, maybe contacting his spirit. So I had a real open family. I've had a lot of things happen. It almost seems like I'm haunted. That's why my name of my different pages is Haunted MD, because I feel like, in a way, I almost feel like these paranormal activity or spooky stuff kind of follows me around. You know, when it comes to the academic stuff with near-death experiences and all that, I kind of got really into that and learning more about that in the last several years. I started out paranormal investigating in 2012 once I had moved to Virginia and realized there was a team here. And around 2018, I decided to go ahead and start this Haunted MD thing so I could talk more about medicine and ghost hunting and things like that. And I started doing research for my page that I have on Facebook called Haunted MD. And I started reading about all these different parapsychological things and near-death experiences and psi phenomena and, you know, the pineal gland and all these kind of things. So that's what kind of got me interested in this whole thing about near-death experiences, because it seems like another way to go at learning about do spirits exist, does the afterlife exist, and all that kind of thing. So that's kind of in a nutshell.
I thought it was interesting you talked about you felt like you were kind of haunted. Do you think that hauntings are something that happen all the time to everybody and only some people may see them? Or do you think it's something that it's just specific people?
It seems like you have to be open to it. As far as does it happen all the time and everywhere, it depends who you talk to. You know, some people I've talked with and some readings that I did, people feel that ghosts are all around us. You know, if you talk to people that are psychic mediums, they're like, they're around us all the time. And you know, and they kind of come, you know, you see them and then you don't see them. So I don't know. It seems like it's possible, if you accept that spirits exist, that they seem to be around us all the time. And it seems like some people are more open to it and more accepting to it, and other people just have it all blocked out. Sometimes I wonder with folks that have it all blocked out, if they have things happen to them and they're either deny what they are or they just don't realize what they are. But it seems like, you know, my experience, wherever I go, I seem to have things happen. I'm definitely not psychic. I'm open to it. You know, I don't necessarily invite it all the time, but it seems like, I think if you're open to the idea that you're going to have more opportunity to experience things, and it almost seems like it's kind of everywhere.
It seems like your parents kind of helped you in helping keep you open by being open to it, not saying, oh, this doesn't exist and shut it down, but actually encouraging you or allowing you to express yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. Because just a little more background on that. So my dad, he's passed on. He died in 1994, but he was into like ghosts and Bigfoot and UFOs. He was a blue collar worker, steel worker kind of guy, big, you know, hunting kind of guy. So, you know, on one hand, he was into the paranormal, but also somewhat practical too. And then my mom was very open to the idea of like angels, and she was more from the religious side. Like my dad was a little less religious and my mom was more religious. So my mom was more about making sure we learned about, you know, God and Jesus and the Bible. And my dad was kind of more about, you know, more of the spiritualism and ghosts like that. So, but we would, like I said, sit around as a family and talk about, hey, did this happen to you? This happened to me. And what do you think about that? And one of the things we used to experience as kids, just to tell you real quick, was this real strong smell of roses, like a disembodied, unexplained smell of roses. It would just come out of nowhere. And the reason why that was significant, we thought, was my grandfather, my dad's dad, was big into roses. He was could grow roses and had beautiful roses around his house. The year I was born, he died before I was born. But we always would get these really strong, concentrated smells of roses. And we eventually started joking, like, that must be Grandpa Molnar visiting us, you know. And a couple of times we even set up like a little candle on the table and said, if Grandpa Molnar, if you're here, can you blow that candle out and stuff like that. So that's the kind of environment I grew up. So I think having that openness and accepting that something outside of the normal exists, it definitely always kept the door open for, you know, not denying it or being afraid of it.
Your parents sound awesome. Sounds like they were very supportive of your interests. And you said your dad was a believer in Bigfoot. Most people don't believe in Bigfoot unless they've had an experience. Has your family had experiences with that before?
That's a good question, man. I can tell you about a couple of things real quick here. So my dad, on his own, when he was hunting, he said he was out in the woods one time, and it was getting late. I think he was out there with his buddy, and they were sitting up against a tree, and they heard something big coming through the woods. Now, they didn't see anything, but he said he heard like these pretty large footsteps kind of coming at them, and then kind of stopped, and they kind of got afraid because they're like, what in the world? And, they looked around, didn't see anything. And then the footsteps kind of turned around and left. But he said it was concerning because he had never heard anything like that, and it sounded like it was pretty big. Now, personally, him and I and my dad's friend had two experiences. So my dad, like I said, he was an outdoorsman and all that kind of stuff. So we used to go fishing, especially as I got a little bit older, like 10, 11, 12, till the time I kind of left home to go to college. I was probably like, I'm trying to think, 12, 13, somewhere around that age. We went fishing up in Ohio. We went between Toledo and Sandusky. Interestingly, it actually was by the David Betsy nuclear plant, but it wasn't right next to the nuclear plant, but it was down the road. And you had to go by that when you went to this fishing spot. It was called Turtle Creek, and it was off the highway a little bit. It was off of Lake Erie. So Lake Erie kind of came in and formed, and then Turtle Creek drained into Lake Erie. There was all kinds of little spots you could park your car and fish. So we had kind of parked on this little peninsula area, set up our gear. We always kind of went evening and night fishing. So it got dark out. And then we were fishing, and you started hearing this grunting noise kind of across the water, like a kind of see maybe some shadow movement, in the trees. And it was probably about, I say like 30 yards, 20, 30 yards. It was a good distance across this water. And then all of a sudden this rock comes flying about halfway across this river. It was a pretty good distance. A big rock comes and splashes down. And me and my dad looked at each other like, what in the world? And we thought, well, maybe there was somebody over there playing tricks, because people can walk over there too if you go like around and come up the other side. So then we kind of just laughed it off. And then all of a sudden, about 30 minutes later, more grunts. And then this thing kind of stood up, dark, shadowy, couldn't see any features of it. And then another big rock, probably like softball to a small kickball, came flying across and hit the water. And at that point, my dad, I could see the fear in his eyes, and then it made me afraid because my dad's afraid. So then we packed the car up super fast and got the heck out of there. So that was, I don't know, man. Something was throwing big rocks at us.
I could see why your dad was a believer.
Yeah. And then real quick, so one more quick story. So about that same time period, we had went fishing around the Sandusky area, but this was inland. It was a place called Rest Haven Wildlife Reserve, and there was hunting there and fishing, and just depended what season. And they had a bunch of little lakes, little ponds you could fish in. So we had set up to fish in a pond, and my dad and his friend were there like fishing. And at this point I was like, I want to have my own little spot. So I kind of walked down the shoreline a little bit and set up closer to the woods. And I was sitting there fishing, and I kept hearing like kind of branches breaking and something walking in the woods. I really couldn't see what was going on. And then like started hearing this grunting noise, like, I'm like, what the hell? And then all of a sudden, this yell came out. This yell like you hear on what you hear on the Bigfoot shows, that.
Yeah.
And then once again, I looked at my dad, and my dad looked at me, and we just got our stuff together and got the heck out of there. We had a pickup truck then, so we just threw everything in a pickup truck. But the funny thing about that was my dad's friend, who was like a chitty chatty, he was just talking and talking. He didn't have any idea what was going on. He's like, what we're doing? Where are we going? Why are we leaving? It's like, my dad's like, just get in the car. Just get in the car. So, but yeah, I don't know, man. I didn't see anything, but it didn't seem like a regular wild animal out there. So
Ohio is a hot spot, so I have no doubt that what you experienced there was some Sasquatch activity.
I'll tell you, man, it's still, to this day, certain things stick in your mind, certain memories, and those particular memories are just so right there,
How did you take your interest in the weird and turn it into paranormal investigating?
So, like I said, all my life, I've had all kinds of crazy, interesting experiences. And then, early 2000s, I started watching all the shows, the Ghost Hunters. When I saw Ghost Hunters, I was like blown away. So I'm like, wait a minute, you can investigate all this stuff that's been happening to me? So I was blown away by Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures and Most Haunted and Paranormal State. I watched all those shows like religiously. And then I didn't really think about joining a team while I was in Ohio. Then I moved to Virginia, like I said, around 2009. Around 2012, I was working overnight, and one of the nurses came back, and she's like, we just investigated St. Albans in Radford, Virginia, and we had all this crazy stuff happen. I'm like, what? you got a team that investigates? She goes, yeah, it's here in Fishersville. It's Twisted Paranormal Society. So I ended up meeting those folks and joining them. That was my first official kind of part of a team. And we did all kinds of investigations, all over the place with them, and it seemed like everywhere we went, we would catch evidence. We were always blown away. Every now and then we would have a place like a private residence where we couldn't really find anything, but it seemed like consistently almost every place we went, we would catch some evidence of like ghost activity. So my official experience began with that team, and then it just kept building. And then like I said, in May of 18, I started that Haunted MD, and now it's just really kind of gone in so many different directions. I still do some investigating as Haunted MD, just me and my girlfriend. And then I work with other teams. One of the nice things about what I do now is I work with a lot of different teams and see a lot of different techniques. And then also it allows me to do the academic stuff with near death.
How did you get interested in near death specifically?
So I got interested in those just after realizing all the different aspects of the paranormal. Prior to starting my Haunted MD thing in 2018, I just had thought about ghost hunting and all that kind of stuff. And then once I realized all these whole other set of information that's out there, that's when I started researching. I'm like, holy cow, this is really neat. And then I think back about some of my patients over the years, may have had those. And then a long time ago, my ex-wife had mentioned about Kubler-Ross in all her work. But, back then it didn't really strike me because I wasn't into it like I am now. So I think it's always the idea of it has always kind of been in the back of my mind. But what really got me started was kind of doing this Haunted MD thing that I do now and researching it, and then realizing, at University of Virginia, they have this whole division that does all this stuff. And I started hearing these stories and, talking more with my patients. And it became pretty interesting because I think when you look at near-death experiences, if you believe they're the soul or the consciousness leaving the body, then that kind of helps support the idea that ghosts or spirits can exist. Because if in a near-death experience you're leaving your body, I mean, that's your soul outside your body. That's what we think spirits are, is our souls kind of wandering. So it's kind of a different approach to trying to learn if ghosts and spirits exist.
So it kind of supports everything. They come together. Right.
It's like two different approaches coming to the same conclusion. Although it's curious because the academic side kind of frowns upon ghost hunting, and then a lot of ghost hunting folks don't quite understand the academic side. So it's kind of like this big disconnect. So I think one of the things that I would like to try to do over time is try to somehow bridge that gap and see how we can bring, the academic stuff into the paranormal investigating, and the paranormal investigating more, see if we can make it more academic, and, try to bring both camps together and say, hey, we're doing the same thing. So
I think that makes sense. It's interesting though. It's like, officially, yes, they are separate. But if you talk to a lot of doctors and nurses, especially ones that work with death a lot, they will tell you they've had experiences.
Yes.
Most everyone has some kind of experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. And actually that's interesting because one of the things people ask me is, well, what do your colleagues think about what you do? And I'm like, people actually love it. They have a lot of stories to share. I think they don't want to share it publicly, but they're willing to share it with me. And I think a lot of times people are relieved to kind of get that off their chest, because I feel like some doctors carry it around and don't realize, and they don't know who to tell or who to talk about it with, but they realize that I'm into it. So they are able to tell me all this stuff. And I've been pretty blown away by some physicians I thought were probably would really poo-poo what I do. But they're like, oh my God, dude, I had this story, I got to tell you, and I'm really interested in what you're doing. And so I've actually been shocked by how many people have stories and how accepting people are for the most part.
It's interesting to me that there are so many people that do have stories, yet it's so taboo to talk about.
No, I know. And it seems like the nurses are a little more open to it. Like hospice nurses, they got all kinds of stories, and they're willing to share it, and often share it among themselves, and much more than physicians do. Although, like I said, when physicians learn about what I'm doing, they do open up right away. I think people just are less likely when they don't know how the other doctors feel about it. So,
do you record these experiences in some way?
Sometimes I do. Actually, there was one of my colleagues. She actually transferred to Seattle now. She had to move because of family reasons, but she had shared an experience with me where she thought she saw the shadow of a lady standing in an area, and it really freaked her out. And she had kind of been keeping this to herself, but the fact that I was into it, she felt like she could share it with me, and we talked about it, and it sounded like she saw a ghost. So I do put that on my page. But you're right, I probably should keep a little more formal log of these things. But I get a lot of people telling me stories. I probably could put a nice little book together on these different stories. An interesting thing, let me tell you guys real quick, that I think I actually was able to help a family member out was we had a guy code, and as a doctors, we run the code and all that stuff. man ended up passing away. We couldn't get him back. But a weird thing happened after he passed. We were able to get his wife in the room while we were doing CPR, and then stop CPR while she was in the room, so that way she could be there officially when we declared him dead. And she was really upset. And I had this amazing, like, weird sense in my head. And I didn't hear anything, but something I felt that the patient was saying, hey, don't worry, man. I was tired of being sick. It's okay. Because I felt really guilty. You always feel guilty when you lose somebody. You try hard. And he was a younger guy, but he had been sick for so long and all this other stuff. And I had this amazing sense about me or thought process going on that, hey, it's okay. So anyways, his wife was having a hard time dealing with all this. And she kept calling me and talking to me. And we would talk through things. I think it was the second or third time she called me. I said, I want you to know I do paranormal stuff. And, I'm open to spirits and all that. And I just want you to know that when we were in your room with your husband and he passed away, I had this sense that he was trying to maybe communicate with me and tell me that he's okay and not to worry. And just by me telling her that, it like changed everything for her. That was really an amazing situation where I think I was able to help her feel better. Exactly what I was experiencing, I don't know. Maybe his spirit was communicating with me somehow. But that was what I felt. And I told her that, and it really seemed to help her feel better.
But if you hadn't said anything, then she wouldn't have had that experience to help her through it too. So it's almost like it was important for you to reach out and to tell her about your experience. Right.
So I think it did help.
Is there a particular experience that you've had with a patient that's kind of piqued your interest in near-death experiences?
I did have a couple of different patients have told me about their experiences. One guy, he told me he had experience, but he didn't want to get into it. So I'm wondering if he had one of the negative experiences. He actually was a younger guy and got really sick. And then he came over to our place for ventilator weaning, to come off the ventilator and further medical treatment. I ended up chatting with him because somehow we got the idea about ghosts. I said, hey, did you have any experiences? And he's like, yeah, I did, man. I was kind of out of my body, but all this crazy stuff happened. I don't want to talk about it. I don't know if something bad happened or if something good happened in his near death and he just didn't know how to deal with it. But he never did tell me what happened. And then I had another gentleman who said he was out of his body and ended up seeing the tunnel of light, going through the tunnel, being around his loved ones. And then he had to come back into his body. He had crashed his car and ended up being a quadriplegic. So I've had some patients, and it's interesting to hear their experiences.
Can you explain the difference between a near-death experience and a deathbed experience?
Yes. And both of those, so they're separate, right? They're separate, and they're both pretty compelling experiences to support the idea that our souls or consciousness survive, as long as you accept the idea that they are like a otherworldly experience. Near-death experience is, something that happens to people. It's a fairly personal experience that happens either when they've been dead for a little bit, very close to death, or just had a severe injury where the chances of dying are pretty high, where they actually a lot of times are out of their bodies and go see the tunnel of light and life review and meet their loved ones and encounter heavenly beings and things like that. And then eventually end up back in their body, either voluntarily or involuntarily. So the idea behind that is that our consciousness or our soul leaves our body for a short period of time. They were dead or close to death. A deathbed vision is something where somebody will experience when they're close to dying. So they're not dead yet, but it's something they actually see either their loved ones or religious figures come for them. It's different than the fact that you're in a process of dying, right? That you're acutely dying. It's more like you're kind of waiting for, the end's coming, and it may be a couple of days before that. Could be closer to your time of death, where you actually see, a deceased loved one, or you see, angels or some kind of type of religious figure come for you, and they're kind of waiting for you. And then when you pass on, they supposedly help you to the afterlife. Whereas the near-death experiences, you're actually out of your body, or you're perceiving the sense that you're, no longer with your body, and you have all these things happen that are pretty amazing. And then you end up back in your body and you survive. With a deathbed experience, you're actually on your way to dying officially, not coming back. So somebody's basically in a deathbed experience or deathbed vision, somebody's coming to help you to the afterlife because your life is pretty much over. Whereas a near-death experience, you're coming back. You're going to survive that. So
deathbed experience is more of a preparatory experience, preparing you for dying. Whereas a near-death experience it's not your time yet, so you're coming back.
Yes, exactly.
So in order for it to be a near-death experience, you have to be out of body. Is that correct?
It's a good question. So the one book I use as a reference right now, it's by Dr. Jeffrey Long, Evidence of the Afterlife. He's researched, he set up a research foundation called Near Death Experience Research Foundation, and they've looked at over like 1,600 near-death experiences. And of those experiences, he's estimated about 75% of people report having out-of-body experience. So what that means is 25% of people have a near-death experience that doesn't have the out-of-body component. So you don't have to necessarily definitively experience out-of-body experience. You can still have the other parts. But the answer to your question is not everybody perceives that they're out of their body, but they may still have different parts of a near-death experience.
So obviously in medicine, well, maybe not in medicine, let's just say in the skeptics, they say that this is probably a hypoxia event, it's hallucination, it's DMT being released from the pineal gland, it's drug overdose from medicines that have been given to the patient. What do you think about those types of skepticisms, and how would you respond to that?
And those are all legitimate things. Folks that study this stuff, we've kind of looked at all that stuff too. Now the DMT thing, just to kind of hit that, since it's a little easier, is, you know, with the human pineal gland, we haven't been able to show that DMT exists in a human that way. So DMT is probably not involved, although there is some research that maybe we do make it, but it doesn't stick around that long. So I don't think the DMT is much of a thing to kind of hang your hat on as an explanation for near-death experiences. As far as all the other things, you know, when it comes to like low oxygen levels or high carbon dioxide levels, that usually when those things happen, you're confused and restless and disoriented. You don't have like these like super clear experiences that are organized that you can remember. You know, when you talk to people that have had near-death experiences, they talk about, you know, everything was so much clearer than it is on Earth. You can hear better, you can see better. You know, my vision was the best I ever had. You know, they're able to tell these step-by-step things and they're pretty structured, you know. So it seems like people during these near-death experiences are conscious, just not in their bodies or not living at the time, physically living. When you compare that to what happens when you have a low oxygen or when you have, you know, medications on board, you usually don't have that organization of your thoughts and all those kind of things. So I don't think like low oxygen and different medications would explain it. It's kind of the argument from the near-death community. The other thing couple other things that kind of argue for something happening besides the brain death or something physiologic happening is the out-of-body component. The people who do have the out-of-body experience, they're able to recall things that they shouldn't know, you know, either stuff that was happening while they were dead, like they look down on their bodies being worked on, or they go to different parts of the hospital, like they'll go to the waiting room or to the nursing station, like their consciousness leaves where the body is and goes to different areas. And they're able to know what family was talking about. They're able to know what the nurses were talking about. You know, there was a story where a patient was coding and the anesthesia guy took the dentures out. They put them in a specific drawer in the code cart that the patient should have known. They were able to verify that because the patient's like, well, my denture, they couldn't find the guy's dentures. So they got him back and they couldn't find where his dentures were. And he's like, well, they're in the drawer. They're in such and such a drawer in the code cart. When you guys were working on me, that's where you put them, you know, and sure enough, that's where his dentures were. So that wouldn't happen just because of oxygen drugs. Another quick story is a lady talked about, she nearly died and she actually floated around the hospital and outside the hospital. And she knew that there was a tennis shoe, a certain color tennis shoe with certain kind of laces on the window ledge of the hospital, but there's no way she should have known that. And they were able to verify that she was right, that while she was out of her body having this experience, this near-death experience, for whatever reason, she saw this shoe on the balcony on one of the ledges and stuff like that. So those kind of things can't be explained by oxygen, low oxygen, and hallucinations and those kind of things.
All right, folks, if you will stick around after the break, we'll be back with more from Dr. Molnar.
What is it that makes us so interested in what we don't understand? We're setting out to investigate everything strange, unusual, and scary in our world.
They're going to be able to scan your brain and upload it to a computer. Some people think of it as like the greatest victory that we could ever have because it makes you immortal in a sense. I think it's terrifying.
It is terrifying. We invite guests who bring their own personal perspectives.
I mean, especially considering the fact that the overwhelming majority of UFO sightings and documentation occurs within miles of nuclear testing facilities.
Yeah. They bring their own encounters with the paranormal.
All of a sudden, I feel this whoosh of wind and this ringing in my ears so loud that makes me stand up straight. And we both had this moment of, maybe we should get out of here.
It was a hot summer day and a hot night, but when I went into this one room, it was freezing. And to this day, it felt like somebody was going to push me down the stairs.
A few months into living at the new house, I was woken up to the lamps being on and the snow globe music box going off.
Hello. And most of all, we just have a ton of fun.
Jacques would never eat, not a single bite, just sip from his glass of wine.
He was a vampire. He was a vampire.
100% a vampire. Holy buckets.
My name is Ashley, and this is my co-host Lauren.
Hello, weirdos.
And you are listening to Keep It Weird.
All right, folks, we're back. Let's continue on with Dr. Molnar. So you also mentioned that people sometimes have a very typical, happy type of near-death experience, and some people don't. You mentioned that one of your patients may have had a not so happy experience. What kind of determines that?
So I think when you look at like a typical near-death experience, it's usually something that's pleasant and pleasurable, that it's full of happiness and joy and peace and love and all-encompassing love, and people feel like it's the most beautiful thing. And a lot of times folks have a hard time wanting to come back from them. So that's kind of our usual near-death experience. The less usual, or maybe atypical, is some people have bad experiences. 11 to 15% of folks will have a negative experience, and what that usually means is that it's really anxiety provoking. They actually broke it down into 4 different types, and I'm having a hard time remembering them right now. But there was some near-death experiences where people feel like they're just out in darkness and just alone, and that scares them. Other people they'll have those typical parts of a near-death experience, but it shocks them so much that it frightens them. Instead of being accepting to it, they're afraid and they can't accept it, and it really scares them. Then other people have like terrifying ones where they're being attacked by evil forces and dark forces, and they actually report seeing other souls being tormented too. So there's these near-death experiences where there people are tormented by bad things. So there's that percentage. The atypical or not so, or the bad ND experiences aren't as common as the typical or the nice, pleasant ones. Exactly why the bad ones are less common versus the typical good NDs is hard to know for sure.
There is also a classification of exceptional. What kind of qualifies as an exceptional ND?
So I think exceptional is a little bit kind of self-explanatory. It's basically, it has all the different parts. When it comes to near-death experiences, it kind of depends who you read. Dr. Bruce Greisen out of UVA, he has a 16-point scale of different components of a near-death experience. The book I've been using, this Evidence of Afterlife, they describe 12 elements of a near-death experience. And then there was another study in Lancet by Dr. Van Lommel, and he broke it down into 10 phases of near-death experience. The reason why I tell you that is exceptional is, I think, when you actually go through all those phases, every near-death experience is kind of like a snowflake, right? They're all different. And even if you have the same step, like say we both have a life review as part of our near-death experience, my life review is probably gonna be different than the way your life review happened. So NDEs are different in what you experience, but also different in if you experience the same phases, those phases are also different. So, but I think an exceptional near-death experience is when people go through all those steps, or a majority of those steps, and they're able to have this amazing experience and recollection that's beyond like, hey, I was out of my body for a little bit and I was back in my body and that's all I know. These people kind of leave their body and they talk to deceased loved ones and they get special information. A lot of times exceptional ones, people will get a lot of special knowledge, either about themselves in the future or about the future of the world in general. So with exceptional, it goes beyond like a typical kind of a couple things happened and I was back in my body, if that makes any sense.
It seems like these experiences have an effect based upon your emotions and your ability to accept it too.
Yes.
You know, whether it be a good experience, whether it be exceptional, whether it be what you learn from it having to do with your personality and having to do with how accepting you are of the paranormal or things that you can't explain here on Earth.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree on that too. And the one thing too that's interesting about the bad NDEs is people can try to, if they can learn to accept it, like say you're having a bad NDE and you're able to say, okay, I'm just going to go with the flow and accept what's happening. As long as you're not being tormented, I guess, it's able to actually kind of convert into a better NDE experience. So that's kind of interesting too. But yeah, I think the more that you're able to accept it, it's easier to kind of deal with it. The other thing that I think maybe you're getting at too was the idea that it changes people is kind of provides evidence for the existence of like a near-death experience and something happening is that most people that have a good experience, it'll change their lives. Like they'll come back and approach life differently. They won't be so stressed out. Some people end up getting divorced. I think there's like 50% of people who have NDEs or 60% of people who have had an NDE end up getting divorced because they maybe were staying in a bad relationship until they had their NDE and realized that there's so much more love out there, so much better out there that they'll get divorced. So it does change you, and people end up, trying to do good things for humanity and for each other. And
you had also just mentioned the 12 steps of a near-death experience. I believe that's research that's been conducted by Dr. Long, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Can you go through those 12 steps and tell us a little bit about each of those?
Sure thing, man. So yeah, the 12 things, and I kind of did a little series on this on my Instagram and my Facebook on an MD. But the 12 steps, according to Dr. Long, are the out of body experience. That's where we perceive that we're out of our bodies. And sometimes we look down on our bodies, or sometimes we just can tell that we're separate from our bodies. The other thing is you get heightened senses, like you can see and hear better than you ever could. The interesting too about that is people that are blind from birth are able to see, which is amazing. So that's another thing that kind of argues for the idea that a near-death experience is not just a dream or a hallucination, because people that have been blind since birth will have these near-death experiences and they can see stuff and describe stuff that they have never seen before, except the fact they were able to see when they were out of their bodies. So that's kind of the heightened senses. Kind of go down the list. The other thing is intense positive feelings. People feel, like everything's okay and positive and lots of love. People go through the tunnel. That's another one. Seeing a brilliant light, encountering beings, family members, angels. Sense of time and space doesn't really matter. Life review, that's where we kind of see our life played back for us. Interestingly, part of that life review that really affects people is you end up feeling stuff that you felt, but you also feel stuff that the other people felt. So say you're really mean to somebody, you'll see that played back, but you'll actually feel what that person felt when you're being mean to them, and that kind of thing. So you get the life review where you see your life kind of flash before you, but you also have all the emotions that, you were feeling and then the other people were feeling too. So that's kind of interesting. And then you encounter other worlds, heavenly worlds, or just amazing. People talk about amazing mountains and flowers and trees and brilliant colors and things like that. Special knowledge, either something pertaining to yourself or just the fact that people learn that we're all of us are all tied together spiritually, or, all of our consciousness is all tied together. So they get this knowledge of how the world and the universe works and things like that. So just, it kind of varies. Some people get knowledge of the future for future world events or future personal events, that kind of thing. Then people reach a boundary or barrier. So I think when I was reading, it's about 50% of people have a choice. They get a choice of, do you want to cross over, that barrier and stay in the afterlife, or do you want to go back? The other 50% just end up back in their bodies. So you kind of reach this barrier where you got to make a decision, or you go back. And then the final thing, the 12th step, is you end up back in your body. So usually it's like a whoosh back into your body, and And those are the 12 steps. And not everybody experiences all of those. Some people will experience all those. And then the book that I use by Jeffrey Long, it actually goes through, he gives all the different percentages for each of those 12 things, like what percentage of people experience, a life review. Interestingly, nobody experiences all of them. So yeah, those are the 12 steps.
You mentioned that like a blind person being able to see, do near-death experiences change with age, race, culture, disability?
That's a great question. The basic core of what a near-death experience is, as far as, leaving if you leave the body, the tunnel, the light, experiencing the warmth and the love and all that stuff stays the same. Where it might vary a little bit is based on religious figures. Like, if you're Hindu, you may not see Christian angels and things like that, but you still see like a religious type thing, religious beings, or you see deceased loved ones. The interesting thing on the research that's being done now with near-death experiences is that across cultures and religions and even ages, children experience the same steps that adults experience. And that's even been used as compelling evidence that something different's going on with near-death experiences than just something physiologic, is that children they talk about similar steps that we just went over. The younger they are, they don't have all the knowledge that we have as adults. But they still describe very similar steps when you've had near-death experiences. So that's a good question. But yeah, across ages, cultures, religions, countries, that kind of thing, the basics are the same, but you may encounter different religious folks, religious beings and things like that. But they're pretty consistent as far as what happens and how it affects them.
Do you have a favorite near-death experience story?
So this wasn't a personal one, but this was when I was reading. So the University of Virginia has the Division of Perceptual Studies, Dr. Bruce Greisen. He's like one of the main guys. If you're interested in this, check him out. He actually has a book out. I think it's called Wake, a new book out about near-death experiences. But he shared an experience, one of the Division of Perceptual Studies YouTube videos. So a man was in a hospital. A nurse was taking care of him. The nurse was going to go on vacation, and she had got a new car. And so she was saying, "Hey, I'm going on vacation," and she went off duty, went on, to go on vacation. And he ended up having a code event for whatever reason and died, but then came back. And when he came back to talk about his story, he said, "I left my body and I had all these things happen, but then I encountered this nurse. I encountered the nurse that was taking care of me in my near-death experience, and she was all upset because she had just crashed her car and died, and her parents got out of this car. She wanted me to tell her parents that she was okay." So he came back to life, and he didn't know that she had died or anything. So they had to tell him that nurse died in a car crash. So during his near-death experience, he encountered her spirit. So that just blows me away, that kind of stuff. And if you check out Dr. Greisen's stuff on YouTube, there's several stories like that are just amazing. The other thing about Division of Perceptual Studies is another leg or another branch of the idea that consciousness survive is children with previous lives or reincarnation. They're also doing, Dr. Tucker at UVA Division of Perceptual Studies does a whole ton of work on reincarnation. And that actually was started by Dr. Ian Stevenson. Dr. Ian Stevenson started the Division of Perceptual Studies because of his interest in the idea that consciousness survives. And he started out he did a ton of research on reincarnation and previous lives. And then Dr. Tucker took over that whole thing. But that's pretty exciting stuff too, because these kids have these stories that they shouldn't have. And they're stories from previous lives, like fighter pilots and actors and policemen and things like that. So that's a whole another argument for the soul or consciousness surviving.
My first experience with near-death experiences came from my mother. She had purchased this book called Return from Tomorrow, which was a book that was written by George Ritchie, I believe, who had this really exceptional near-death experience. And if you're not familiar with Dr. Ritchie's experience, it is absolutely something worth looking into. It really is an experience that I would classify as exceptional. Wow. And I've read that book probably 2 or 3 times throughout my life, and it's a very, very interesting near-death experience. And I think it was Richard Moody who had come in contact with George Ritchie that kind of instigated this whole research into near-death experiences. What organizations are currently researching this that you're aware of?
Hey, but interestingly, so Dr. Moody, you're right, he kind of coined the term of near-death experience. But Dr. Moody was a student or was actually underneath Dr. Greisen. So Dr. Greisen was a little bit older than Dr. Moody. I think Moody was a resident or like a senior medical student. I think Dr. Moody was a resident underneath Dr. Greisen when Moody wrote the book. And Moody actually got Dr. Greisen into the near-death experiences. And that was like, 45 years ago or something like that. So, So interestingly, Dr. Moody and Dr. Greisen kind of come together. But as far as places that are studying this right now, obviously University of Virginia, Division of Perceptual Studies, they're worth checking out if you're interested in these kind of things. They got all kinds of stuff online. If you're physically in the area, they have a library of all their different research on near-death experiences and reincarnation and a whole bunch of other parapsychology things. There's the International Association of Near-Death Studies based out of, I think, North Carolina. They're actively researching this. Dr. Jeff Long has his site, the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. You can go online, and I think they're based out of Louisiana, but they're collecting data. And on their website, too, you can look at the data they've collected, but you also can look at the different stories. And if you've had your own near-death experience, you can submit your story, too, and they'll take a look at that for you. What else? There was I think, University of North Texas, University of Southampton over in the UK. And then there was someplace else in the United States I'm drawing a blank on now. But there's active programs out there. There used to be, as a side note, interesting note, there used to be a ton of parapsychology programs in America all around. Now there's not a lot of them left anymore, but it's an interesting thing to look at. They did anything from near-death experiences to psi phenomena and remote viewing. The whole thing, Stargate Project for remote viewing came out of a parapsychology program. I'm drawing a blank on the university who had that. But anyways, yeah, so those are some places you can kind of look up stuff, and if you're interested or if you want to share your stories.
Besides recording these experiences, how do they go about researching it?
Basically, they talk to you. They usually use questionnaires. Most people researching will submit a questionnaire. Like Dr. Greisen has a 16-point questionnaire, and then Dr. Long, I think, he has like a 30-some questionnaire. And they basically set these different questions up to kind of really get to what you experience and all that stuff. So the research is more based on people's stories and what they experienced. And then I'm not sure how they're coordinating that with like what happened during it. Like, was there low oxygen levels? Was there, what medications were used? I know in some of the studies that I've read that they did try to control for some of that. Like they couldn't explain certain things just because the oxygen was low or the vital signs were bad or something like that. So, but most of it's questionnaires to answer your question.
I've always found death, very interesting. We have this belief that we have a soul, a body and a spirit. And we have this belief that when we die, we separate and the soul goes somewhere, depending upon your religious upbringing, your religious belief. That could be heaven, that could be, other places. But we don't seem to have this belief that the soul existed before birth. Are there any insight into whether we had a soul or an existence before we came to Earth?
I think if you say the soul continues on after the body dies, then I think that soul has potential to get reincarnated. I don't think, once the soul's been in a body and the body dies, then that soul just doesn't get to another body. It seems like there's a chance for reincarnation. And that's what I was kind of getting at earlier with this whole thing that children with previous lives, that it seems like for some reason, some consciousness or souls get recycled. And it's funny, I have to talk about that as a doc, that depending on what you're doing as your practice, you're kind of on both sides of it. Like if you're delivering babies, you're on the other side of people coming into the world, the soul's coming in as a baby. And then, like what I do, I'm on the other end of it with people leaving the world. So I think, there's a good argument that we get reincarnated. Are there fresh souls that are freshly produced? That's a good question. One of the arguments for the existence of ghosts and all that is in spirits is that in our souls is that energy can neither be created or destroyed. So if you kind of go along with that whole idea that everything that was ever started is here and never really goes away. So it makes you think that our souls just get recycled. If you believe that there's conscious souls, that we just kind of get recycled into,
or go from one state to another.
Right. Now when you look at quantum physics and all that, there's all this multidimensional theories and, that when our energy, that's our consciousness, leaves our bodies, that perhaps it goes to a different universe or parallel universe. And every now and then it gets close enough that it can interact with us and things like that.
You mentioned hauntings. Do you think that the spirits that are left here on Earth are spirits that simply haven't crossed over to the next phase? Or do you think that the spirit world just happens to be around us and we sometimes get glimpses into that?
That's a good question, man. If you had to pin me down on that one, I'm almost of the thought that I think it's all around us, just in a different form that we can't perceive. One of the interesting things I was reading about and did some post about on my Facebook page is the idea about like dark matter and dark energy. And then there's this whole thing about the Higgs boson and the Higgs fields, in quantum physics, that there seems to be this all around us. There's an energy field that kind of keeps everything together and all that kind of stuff that we just can't see and perceive that. So I kind of wonder, if our souls and our consciousness or energy that they're in our bodies, but then leave our bodies when our body die, do they go into that field and that's where they're at? And every so often we're able to interact with them for whatever reason. But it almost seems to me that they're all around us, just in a state or a dimension that we can't perceive. But every now and then they're able to interact with us, if that makes any sense.
Well, if you're a religious person, particularly Christians, there's a lot of talk about a veil being put over our eyes. And I've often considered that to be different dimensions of light. Our bodies can only see within certain spectrums of light.
Right.
And, and when they talk about the veil being lifted and you seeing glimpses into the other world, I wonder if it's possible that, we're basically seeing for a moment into a different spectrum of light that just allows us to see into more that's around us that we can't really perceptualize otherwise.
No, I agree. I think that makes sense to me. That's
I think
for sure.
There's also kind of a block on our minds. And I think that when it's lifted, our minds are opened up to things that we hadn't considered before. I think that also is kind of like a light, in that we can understand things that we'd never thought of before, that all of a sudden things that maybe were scary to us or maybe that were confusing or frightening make sense.
I think it's a good point, especially when you consider the idea that children or little kids, 2, 3, 4, seem to be really open to paranormal experiences. People always talk about, man, my toddler was talking to somebody and they weren't there, and then eventually, when they can talk, they're like, yeah, I was seeing grandpa, who's passed away. So it seems like when we're little or closer to being, closer to birth, that there is something about our minds that we're more open or more able to perceive things. And then as we get older, that we kind of lose those senses. Although it seems like some folks still seem to maintain a little bit of that, people that have the psychic abilities. And I think there are some true mediums that can kind of perceive things too. But it seems like, yeah, something happens where we're not able to perceive it, but every now and then we are. But I agree.
I wonder if it's almost a purposeful block that our brain does to kind of protect us, because things happen in our lives and it's a true phenomenon where our brains can literally block experiences out to maybe protect us. It seems to me that there's some kind of block that happens where we just don't acknowledge things that happen to us anymore out of, our normal realm.
It could be.
Sense.
Well, also consider that if we could see all of those things around us all of the time, that would be a very different existence than what we're having right now.
Maybe frightening.
Yeah. It'd be hard to focus, right?
No doubt.
Well, I have to talk to people that have medium abilities. I'm like, how do you tune it out? Because some people seem to be, really legitimate. And I'm like, how do you tune it all out if it's always there? And they're like, well, I just learned to kind of block it out. But yeah, it would have to be very distracting if you were constantly able to see all those things.
So one last question that we had for you is, what is after-death communication, and how is that important to the research that goes on regarding near-death experiences?
Yeah, that's actually a great topic. That's like a whole other topic. It's like a whole big topic. So first I'll tell you a story from the doctor side of things, and then I'll tell you about some near-death experiences. So I try to be pretty open. I can kind of get a sense when I'm working with patients and families who are kind of open to paranormal stuff, and I'll get a bond with some of these people. And I've had one particular family, we were talking about, their loved one became hospice, and we made them comfortable and let them pass away, on our unit. And they kept in touch with me, and they said, hey, when we got home, our lights started acting crazy. Our electronics were acting crazy. Interesting smells that reminded us of mom. So it was cool because they seem to be having some pretty legitimate after-death communication. And what after-death communication is when it can either happen exactly at the time of death or kind of any time after the time of death. The research that people have done on it, usually it happens closer to the time of death. Like, it's weird for it to happen years and years later, although it's usually within that first year or so, definitely within that first, at the time of death and that first, few months after death. It's believed to be the soul of the deceased person trying to reach out to their loved ones and give them signs that they're around. It could be all kinds of things that can happen. It could be the clocks acting strange. It could be radios and TVs acting strange, lights coming on and off. It could be smells, disembodied odors, like I was telling you about my, my grandfather and the roses, but it could be familiar smells. It could be things being moved, actually physically being moved. You can actually see the person. Some people have reported that at the time that their loved one or a friend died, they actually briefly saw them standing in a hallway. So it can be a full body apparition. The other thing that you hear is kind of classic two things are kind of classic is animals acting strange. People talk about cardinals and birds and things like that. I've heard deer, I've heard rabbits, squirrels, just not behaving typically like they would, like, being really friendly, approaching the house, approaching you, birds acting differently than they normally would. The other thing that you hear a lot about is coins. People talk about pennies from heaven, finding strange coins. We did an investigation. I helped the team out do an investigation, and the people wanted some answers about whether their deceased son was still with them, because they were always finding quarters in the strangest spots. And the son was always in the quarters. And whenever they would talk about him, they would find these quarters and like, it just shouldn't have been there and kind of thing. So that was interesting. So coins, electronics, animals, smells, apparitions, but it's believed to be that's the soul of the deceased person reaching out. I guess, how does it tie in with near-death experiences? I guess if you say with a near-death experience, that's the soul leaving and coming back. With an after-death communication, that's the soul exploring. Now the body's officially dead. That's the soul roaming around and trying to give signs. One of the things people ask me is, how long does a soul stick around after you actually die? I don't know. It seems like some folks do stick around and give a lot of signs to their family members, and other ones never give any signs. And it's hard to know, do you immediately go to heaven or afterlife? Do you may have a choice to go, so I don't know. Does that kind of answer? It does. Thank you. Answer the question. Yeah, no, it's a good question. No, after death is cool. There's so many cool things after death and near death and reincarnation and, the ghost investigating, there's so many cool things out there.
Dr. Molnar, we want to thank you so much for being with us today. Can you tell our audience a little bit about any future plans that you might have?
Sure thing. Yeah. So I started a book at one point. I'm hoping to get back to it. I actually had a pretty good start on it, and I kind of fizzled out a little bit, but I'm trying to get motivated. I want to kind of write a haunted MD book about my life, kind of as a kid growing up and some of the things I experienced, and then also talk about what it's like to be a physician who ghost hunts and, and incorporate some of the near-death experience and all that things in there. So I'm looking at doing that. I'm doing some investigations. I'm actually going up to the Hinsdale house in the end of April. We're going to go investigate Hinsdale. I do some smaller investigations with some local teams. We're going to be doing some different things. I have another podcast, I think April 21st coming up too. So I'm doing, I just kind of, as things pop up, I kind of do them. I'm trying some different things. I posted on Instagram recently that we always catch these electronic voice phenomena. So I'm trying the idea of, what if we just use a microphone with an amplifier and just see if we can record any kind of audio phenomena. So I'm trying to look at different ways to do paranormal investigating. Trying to think what else. I think that's all the big stuff for now.
That's a lot.
Where can people find you if they want to contact you?
So right now I got an Instagram. It's Haunted MD, small h, Haunted, then the line underneath it, MD. That's my newest platform. My kind of base platform is my Facebook page. It's Haunted, capital H, Haunted MD. So it's Haunted, and then M.D. on Facebook. That's what I started when I started the whole Haunted MD project back in 2018. So that has all sorts of interesting evidence posts, a lot of things I've typed up, written posts about, the pineal gland and, the previous university-based programs. So there's a ton of information on my Facebook Haunted MD page. And then I have YouTube, Don Molnar, Haunted MD, and that goes back pretty far. So my Facebook page, I started first, then my YouTube page, and then Instagram. And then I'm still working on getting a website up, but I haven't quite got that done yet. So,
Dr. Molnar, thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate your time.
This has been really wonderful. We appreciate
Sure
all you've
thing.
done and talking to us. And I'm just interested, enthralled, and enjoying listening to you. So I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for us today. We'll see you next time. All right, folks, that's the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you listening. If you have enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing through your favorite podcast player. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And remember that if you've had a paranormal experience that you would like to share, you can email us at prairielandparanormalpodcast@gmail.com, or you can submit that experience through our website at www.prairielandparanormalpodcast.com. So, until next time, remember, don't be normal when you can be paranormal.